Good evening and welcome to the Billy Wilder Theater. I'm Michael Ned Holte, co-curator with Connie Butler of the Hammer Museum's second Los Angeles Biennial, Made in LA 2014, on view through September 7. I'm very happy to be presenting Made in LA artist Judy Fiskin's Art Talk Trilogy screening. Judy is here with us tonight, so please join us after the screening for a Q&A that I will be moderating. Now on to tonight's program and Judy Fiskin. Prior to Made in LA 2014, Judy Fiskin's works in film and video have been screened at institutions and festivals, including the J. Paul Getty Museum and Museum of Contemporary Art, Los Angeles, the documentary Fortnight series at the Museum of Modern Art and the Underground Film Festival in New York, the Berkeley Film and Video Festival, the Chicago Underground Film Festival, Museum of Contemporary Art, Detroit, World Fest, Houston, Dallas Video Festival, Cinema, Texas, and South by Southwest in Austin, the Henry Art Gallery at the University of Washington, Antimatter Festival in Victoria, British Columbia, Images Festival in Toronto, Centro Cultural Contemporánea in Barcelona, Amsterdam International Documentary Film Festival, Rencontres Internationales, Paris, Berlin, the Kassel Film and Video Festival in Germany, European Media Art Festival in Osnabrück, Germany, Galleria Virgilio, Sao Paulo, Brazil, and many more. And many more. Her awards include the Silver Award, World Fest Houston 2000, Best of Festival, Berkeley Film and Video Festival, and the Silver Spire Award, San Francisco International Film Festival, 1998. Judy Fiskin has had solo photography exhibitions at Castelli Graphics, Kurt Marcus Gallery, Greenberg Van Doren Gallery, Kurt Marcus Gallery, Greenberg Van Doren Gallery, and the New Museum in New York, Angles Gallery in Santa Monica and Culver City, Museum of Contemporary Art, Los Angeles, Patricia Faurer Gallery in Santa Monica, the Birmingham Museum in Alabama, and the Center for Creative Photography in Tucson, Arizona. She has participated in group exhibitions locally, nationally, and internationally. Born in 1945 in Chicago, Fiskin began photographing surveys of American vernacular architecture and landscape in the early 1970s. Several decades later, Fiskin moved to film, video, and other narrative-based work. With this shift came more explicitly personal and revealing work. Her first film, Diary of a Midlife Crisis, 1997, gave voice to her struggle to move into a new medium while grappling with her own humanity and that of those around her. Fiskin's latest short film, I'll Remember Mama, 2013, is currently on view in Made in LA. Drawing upon and contradicting director George Stevens' 1948 movie, I Remember Mama, Fiskin's most recent work is a meditation on the imminent passing of her mother, the objects that she will leave behind, and the memories and knowledge that they will disappear with her passing. Please don't miss it if you haven't already seen it. Tonight we are presenting three of Fiskin's films that situate art and its aesthetic and cultural values as subject, albeit in three very different ways. The first is My Getty Center, 1999, which chronicles the winter when El Niño and the Getty Center came to Los Angeles at the same time, with both receiving plenty of Hollywood-worthy media attention. 50 Ways to Set the Table from 2003 documents a peculiar LA County Fair event known as tablescaping, along with an entire lexicon of aesthetic discernment and value. The most recent of the three films that we'll be showing, Guided Tour from 2010, sets two museum docent talks against images of art that have no relationship to the art that is being discussed. Without further ado, please enjoy Judy Fiskin's Art Talk Trilogy, and please stay for the Q&A. Some aesthetic decisions.
Save your questions.
You've been one of the most interesting audiences. I have to say, I haven't seen these three for a while, and now I'm seeing them in the light of your new video, I'll Remember Mama, which you made last year, but made in LA, and I want to make sure we talk about that as well, even though we didn't screen it tonight. It's in part of the show, and I think has an interesting relationship to your other video, all three of these videos in some way. I think maybe it would be there. I'll also just say at the beginning, there's Judy wrote an essay for the Made in LA catalog, which is called The End of Photography, which is also the name of one of your films, and talks about your transition from photography to video and filmmaking in the mid 1990s. Maybe it'd be worth just mentioning or talking about that briefly, why you made that transition, and because I think a lot of people know your photographs really well and they've been exhibited, but there is certainly, I mean, for the last 17 years, your work has been in film and video.
Yes.
And you continue to make it. So maybe we could talk about that just as a little introduction.
Okay. Well, in 1990, I came down with a autoimmune disease that runs in my family, and I was very sick for 2 years. And then when I started to get better, I still never got well enough it affected my back and my peripheral joints, which means my feet and my toes, and I never got well enough to stand up in the dark room long enough to really have a productive time in there. And I tried for a couple of years, but I think I only made a few photographs in those years. And but I didn't know what else to do. And then one morning I woke up with an idea for a 1-minute video and just jumped on it and made the 1-minute video, and then made a few more very short videos and put them together. And I never showed that, but then after that I made a second video and kept going.
So you consider Diary of a Midlife Crisis to be your first video? It's the first one that was put into the world.
That went public, yeah.
Yeah. And I actually think that has a strong relationship to I'll Remember Mama as well.
You do?
I do, yeah. Well, I think there's something very personal about it. I think looking at your photographs in light of your film and video work allows one to read the photographs quite differently. There's actually more personal information embedded in some of those photographs, many of those photographs, than one might initially see or think about. One might look at your photographs of buildings, for example, and think about typological studies and things like that. But there's actually a tremendous amount of history and personal information in those photographs. And in fact, some of the bodies of works that you made in photography in the 80s and into the 90s are really about aesthetics and about art.
And even the little houses were about that. And my work often got put into that typological category. And at the time that I was making my first photographs of little stucco houses, I was being considered for a show called New Topographics that ended up being all men except for one couple. So there was a woman in it. And in retrospect, I feel like there were certain things that we all had in common, those photographers and I, but except that I was even then interested in taste, and they weren't. And maybe that was shining. They're peeping out a little bit, you know. And I think that would have been considered a less serious interest than the things that they were interested in.
Did you have to go to San Bernardino to discover taste?
No, I discovered taste, at the foot of my mother.
We'll get to that.
Yes, okay.
I was thinking about the series Some Aesthetic Decisions, which I think is from 1983 to 84, which is primarily photographs of plant and flower arrangements, but other kinds of arrangements as well. And it really, there's a kind of domestic sense about it as well that I think relates very closely to 50 Ways to Set the Table. And then in 1990, you did a series called Some Art. And I think for the first time made photographs directly of other people's artwork.
Yeah, although, most of it was craft. And then there was a big hierarchy in craft, which I went to a lot of different kinds of craft shows, and I could see that there was a kind of low end of craft and a kind of middle-brow craft and a very high end of craft. And then just to kind of confuse matters, I threw in some real art. I have a painting in that series by Tony Green, who died very young of AIDS, and there's a tribute to him inside Made in LA that two other artists put together.
Well, David France, who's the curator of the One National Gay and Lesbian Archives, organized it.
Okay. But the thing is that when you put, my photographs were very small, and by that time I was working in a square, and when you put those small images and my kinds of black and white prints together, it got harder to tell, like the high from the low and the real from the craft and that kind of thing. And that was part of a lot of what I was thinking about when I was making those.
To paraphrase you in my Getty Center, the river of high art flooded into the river of low art, and we would need a bulldozer to sort it out.
Yes. But even the bulldozer couldn't sort it out.
Of course. I think maybe we should get to the question you didn't want me to ask.
That's okay.
Which is about the idea of art talk, and it's something that, in seeing these again, I felt very. Your work is always, or usually, incredibly funny, particularly the films and videos. I didn't know the photographs were incredibly funny until after getting to know the film and video work. But I also find myself very moved and also provoked in a way, particularly as somebody who writes about art as one of my primary pursuits in life. And in seeing 50 Ways to Set the Table again, I find it very easy to laugh at the whole idea of tablescaping and at the kind of banter and the kind of aesthetic questions that are being raised, but I also recognize it as a searing indictment of what I do at some level, which is painful. But it's
I'm glad that means I succeeded.
It provides a moment of introspection that I don't always see coming, and then it just slaps you right in the face.
Well, I did show it to a curator. I was sort of, at that time I didn't have gallery representation. I got kicked out of my gallery when I started making videos. And so I was taking it around to museum curators that I knew, and I showed it to a curator, and I could see that through the first half she was antsy. I think she was thinking this is like a PBS documentary or something like that. And then into the second half, when the judges started talking, she kind of froze and said, "This is what we sound like." That was kind of the part of the point anyway. It wasn't the only point. The nice thing about film is, this was the first time I had captured human behavior, which just really thrilled me. Actually, I didn't capture it. Peter Kirby, who was on camera, and Mike Jarman, who was a former student of mine, captured it. But the fact that you could capture that on film was just incredible to me.
Actually, of all of these, of all of your films and videos, it seems like 50 Ways to Set the Table and Guided Tour are the two where you are least present in any explicit way. There's a sense of you where the judges reach an impasse in their decision making and are looking for help. But obviously the camera crew and director are not offering any guidance.
That would be wrong.
Did the judges ever see it?
Well, okay. They got replaced because they misbehaved in front of the camera, and which really, made me feel bad. I didn't mean to do that, and they took it very seriously. And one of them got kicked upstairs, and she became like a
desk job.
No, she became like what is it called, like on the board of the fair, but they wouldn't let her judge the tablescaping anymore. And they before these two women did it, it was always given to high school etiquette teachers, and they brought a couple of etiquette teachers back because they weren't supposed to look at the guy's name. They weren't supposed to pick things up. They were just breaking a lot of rules, and I think they knew it. I mean, they said to me at the very beginning, we always have a huge fight. And they were very excited about that was going to be captured on video. So I think that they were just a little bit, the way people get when you're filming them. But it had consequences, which I was sorry about.
Clearly, one of the judges was not fully buying the Camelot mythology.
No. No, I think she was a Republican.
I had that distinct feeling.
Yes. And I think her judging had that Republican edge to it too.
I think so too.
This tablecloth is too short.
There is also something of an etiquette lesson in your newest film, which is upstairs in the video gallery, if you haven't seen it. And it's a recitation of rules or commands, etiquette, presumably provided by your mother at some point, and spoken by you, including don't wear velvet in July. I'm glad I didn't wear velvet. It's July 1st. And don't wear white after Labor Day. Be careful. And a number of others, too, that have to do with specificity of etiquette. Were those all remembered?
Most of them, yeah. The one about don't let your pencil leave the paper when you're writing in cursive. That didn't come from my mother. I saw that in an etiquette book. I did a little bit of research to just flesh it out, but the thing is, my mother did teach me to write, so only I know that. But so that's for me, that's in there. She taught me to write cursive because I skipped the grade where they taught you that.
My mother used to teach that.
Did she?
Yeah. She's really not happy about my handwriting these days. So I like these kind of recurring things that come back, and one can locate some aesthetic decisions in 50 Ways to Set the Table, and then one can locate elements of both of those in I'll Remember Mama as well. One of the other things about I'll Remember Mama that struck me in relationship to my Getty Center is the use of found footage, and I have to say, seeing my Getty Center reminds me so much of my first few years in Los Angeles. And I moved to Los Angeles in 1995, so shortly before El Niño and before the Getty Center. And freshly arrived from Wisconsin, where the rivers of low art flow freely. I was amazed by Los Angeles news. And
they don't do it like that in Wisconsin?
They don't look that good. They don't have great names like Johnny Mountain or Christine Devine. But I come from a place that has weather. So So I was very struck by the kind of apocalyptic overtones of the newscasts. And I actually remember the first day I witnessed rain in Los Angeles was Halloween in 1995. And I remember seeing the news that night because I loved to go home and watch the news. And, you know, it was terror in the Southland. And I'm like, it's rain. It's wet.
That's kind of what I was saying when I was on my back porch. It's raining.
Can we talk about the origins of that video a little bit? Because am I right that it was actually shown at the Getty?
Yes, it was. I had started making that film just because those signs that were all over Los Angeles saying "Your Getty Center" just pissed me off, and also because I really didn't like their choice of site, because it's like, could you pick anything more difficult to get into and out of, especially if you're from anywhere east of Doheny, you know, and. But they were always making this big deal about outreach. So one of the signs would say, "Your Getty Center," but they would have like a one word, and one of them said "imagine," and it had a little African American boy kind of like looking up, imagining, and I'd go by that and go, yeah, he's imagining, what if this were in my neighborhood? So I just started going up there and doing little kind of guerrilla things. Like when I went up on the tram, if you look out of the tram in any other direction, you see the freeway, you see the trees that they planted on the hills. But if you look out the back, especially at the beginning, it was a very kind of dry landscape. And so I was doing these things, and I hadn't put it all together yet. And then I had lunch with a curator who had been hired by the Getty to do a show, but she hadn't decided what the show would be. And she asked me what I was doing, so I described the stuff that I was doing at the Getty. And it gave her the idea to have a show up there. They called it Departures, 11 Artists Look at the Getty, or something like that. And it wasn't that long after the Getty opened. And so she invited me and 10 other artists to respond to something at the Getty or to the Getty as a whole. And so that's what came out. And I also want to say that the footage with the docent who was saying, how does this painting make you feel? And is this a rich city or a poor city? Mike and I were up there just doing the sounds of the guards in these places. If you've ever listened, you know, they wear rubber-soled shoes and they squeak. And so that's where we were getting the squeaking shoe noise. And we walked into this room, and there was this docent talking to these little kids. And it was, so I just motioned at him, like, pick up your mic and point it that way. And so I didn't go there looking for that, but that same day, I went to sit down in another room that had a bench, and another docent came in with another bunch of little kids and stood them in front of a painting of a little girl. I think it was an American 19th century painting, and the first thing out of her mouth is, this a little girl rich or poor? And I think part of it, I mean, the docents were obviously poorly trained, but also the Getty cost $1 billion, which was a lot of money in those days, not as much now. And I think that was just in the air, just the idea of all that money that was spent on that campus was in the minds of the docents.
And that scene, which I forgot that was in that film, but it's a precursor to guided tour in many ways, and in guided tour you're also back at the Getty Center.
Yes.
Among many other institutions.
Yes. Well, yeah, and I also wanted to say about the first docent, they still do these architectural tours of the Getty if you go there. And my first husband accused me of being mean to that docent. And actually, I mean, I can see where it could come off that way, but what I was really speaking to was what he had been taught to say. And that was coming directly, I think, from the architect. So
I'm
that's
not surprised. Actually, I was delighted to learn that an accordion that's almost fully extended is nearly 30 inches wide.
Well, his accordion anyway.
His accordion. I mean, you did use footage from Concert of Wills, which is the great documentary about, great is maybe in quotes, about Richard Meyer and Robert Irwin and their sort of ego. I'm trying to watch my language. Their ego battle over the some aesthetic decisions that took place at the Getty Center.
That's true, but that film starts with the director of the whole shebang, not just the director of the museum, but the director of the whole thing together, the GRI, the Conservation Institute. Harold Williams gets in front of the camera and says, "People don't know anything about art. They aren't educated. So we're going to put this up on a hill where there's a good view and get them up here." And then later on, John Walsh says something similar about why they have you going into the galleries and then out and into the galleries again, and talks about sort of the pleasures of going to the Getty, which are great, which are the wonderful trees and the garden, and the food is not bad, and all these places to sit outside. And he says, but they'll have to go through the galleries to get to that destination, and maybe some of the art will brush off on them. So even before I saw Concert of Wills, you kind of could pick that up, that kind of condescension to the audience.
I actually thought it was incredibly provocative that you had a shot from the tram pointing down the hill rather than going up to the kind of triumphant shot leading up to the Getty.
Well, that was on purpose.
Yeah, I assumed it was. I assume it's all on purpose, unless you tell me otherwise. I think we should take some questions. I could ask you questions all night, but I think there might be some out here.
In the first video, I saw that you use a lot of the images to kind of showcase the awkwardness. And then in the last video, you kind of switched around in that the words made it really kind of deep and kind of meaningful, while the images were kind of disconnected, but it still kind of stood out. Like when you were showing the dandelions, and then there was talking about World War I. On that one, did you start from just the images, or did you start from the speaking? Like, how did you connect the two?
I think in that one that the idea arrived to me whole. That is, that I wanted. I had recorded these two talks earlier. It was two different docents at LACMA, and they were years apart. I just had an idea, I just would like to record these. Maybe I could use this. I mean, one of the ways you work as an artist, or at least I do, is you just sort of have a pile in the corner of your studio that grows and grows, and then you get an idea, and then you start picking things out of the pile. That's metaphorical. And so I had those two docent talks, and they were great because the docents were so different. They were both lively, so they would be useful to me. And then as Michael was saying, I had done these photographic series where I photographed art, and I really enjoyed doing that. And I really enjoyed, as I said, photographing high art, low art, medium art, all different kinds of art. And so I don't remember, but I may have been doing that for a while too with no particular purpose, or I may have gotten the idea and then just gone out and done that. I really like to photograph at this event called A Fair in the Park in Beverly Hills, and it's AFFAIRE. And it's a craft show,
Fancy.
basically. So I actually had a lot of footage from that. And then some of the stuff was actually quite, was really real art. Like I photographed in Ace Gallery. Who's that guy with the coats hanging on the walls? Was an Arte Povera guy.
Is it Cunelis?
It was Cunelis, Giannis Cunelis. The coats hanging on the wall. And actually, I think all of that stuff, all of the, when I was, I used it as a motif for, okay, now we're walking through the museum and we're just seeing things in the galleries. All of that was Giannis Cunelis. So there really was a range of stuff, some of which I had already collected and some of which I think I did afterwards. And as far as, I'm glad that you got that there was kind of some depth there, because you're sitting next to Fiona Carlin, who's one of the docents from LACMA, the one with the lovely British accent. And Fiona did a fantastic job. It was one of the best docent talks I ever heard, actually, and so I mangled it, for which I thank you for being such a good sport about. But so Fiona was the one who said little copper eyelashes. But Fiona really had a way of explaining some kind of profound ideas about art. And so I pulled mostly from her. I pulled from the other one for humor, and I pulled from Fiona for poetry.
Again, there's a kind of, it is very humorous in some way, particularly for those of us who know those works or who've had to do a guided tour of a exhibition, which I've been doing a lot of lately. But it actually, I mean, even recognizable artworks became very strange and new in that context, and having something very different said over them. I mean, it's a classic defamiliarization strategy,
Yes.
as we all know. But it works, and it really does cause me to ask all sorts of questions about works that I've already kind of cataloged in my head and know what to do with, or knew what to do with.
Well, and the other thing when I was watching it this time that I was thinking about was, then there's all, and again, this may or may not be conveyed in the film, but that last shot of the boat that's slowly making its way across the gallery, it wasn't, it was a piece of contemporary art that that I thought kind of failed. I thought it was a little bit too toy-like, but in black and white Super 8, I kind of transformed it into something better than it was, I think. And so there was what I was doing, you know. There was also like how things look on film, which, so when I went back to Super 8, that was a huge, great thing for me, because video is naturally in color. I'm not that sensitive to color or good at color. And so when I started doing video, I thought, well, and when I started doing video, there was no HD. Video looks good now. There was no way for it to look good then, especially with the equipment I was using. And so I just said, well, forget about how it looks. I mean, I could still frame something, but as a photographer, but it wasn't going to look great. But when I went back to Super 8, it was like going back to photography, and I knew what to do with that.
Other questions?
In that 50 table setting thing, I found myself feeling very condescending toward the taste there. Do you ever come up with that yourself? You were talking about the architects.
Toward the contestants, or toward the... You felt
Toward the visual, what I was seeing, and then listening in on someone's conversation of judging it, and then
So were you
talking
condescending?
about the Republican with the shorter table.
Yeah.
And I found a lot of judgmentalism in it. And then you talked earlier about the architects being quite judgmental about who is going to see the Getty and why they need to go from gallery to gallery. So do you see yourself in...
Well, I certainly didn't...
Or do you feel...
If you'd ever seen my 4th of July table setting, you would know where I stand vis-a-vis the people setting the tables, which is I'm right in there with them. Toward the judges, the secret to all of this, and I don't know if you've been next door to see I'll Remember Mama. It's all about my mother. The photographs are all about my mother. The films are all about my mother. So I wouldn't say it's exactly condescending. I would say, I'm still in the rebellious stage, where it's just saying, yeah, you've got your rules. What are they worth?
I think there's also, the question about judgment's funny because they're judges, right? That's that's their job, but then they even reach they do reach an impasse at a certain point, and they're scrambling for some sense of what their criteria are. And I think we are doing that all the time in our art world as well. And I think, I think that's the part where it can be funny and critical at the same time.
Well, it's something about the limits of art talk because, I've been going to see a lot of art lately, and, I'm saying, oh, God, those John Altoon colors, they're so luscious, great colors. Sometimes you say that really has a lot of work in it. Sometimes you say stuff is elegant, it overlaps. It just really does, and it's almost never adequate to what you're looking at, in a way. That's one.
Trust me.
And I think, that was one of the reasons why when I took you into the Getty and started looking at the sculpture, which again was a mixture of it was quite a mixture of quality, but it was like, we're just not going to talk about this. This is something to look at. Let the talk be all around it, but not when we're looking at it.
Mm-hmm. Brennan, did you have a question?
Hi. I just want to say I really appreciate the how clear an analysis of class is taking place in the work that I'm seeing, and I think that especially, and I'm wondering if so I have a two-part question. The first is that when especially now when there's income inequality is increasing, and how that's embodied in our art works and institutions. Because I think that my Getty film is incredibly prescient about what is actually taking place now. And it's similar, and my other question is about, I see so much in this the role of you, the artist, as the critic, also making fun of criticism. And you said that the work was all about your mother, and there's a critic who is actually has a relationship to art that feels very loving at the same time as you're rebelling against art as an institution. And in a way, and I don't know if this is far-fetched, but art becomes like mother, they're overlapping in a way. And I'm wondering if you think of that also in your work, kind of bringing that more kind of personal element about the mother and aligning it with the art, because it's kind of infused throughout.
I'm not sure I entirely understand what I'm supposed to answer, but
Well, the first question is about class.
yeah, well, there's definitely it's in a lot of the work. It's in when I did some aesthetic decisions, I went to all of these flower shows, and there was a group in Palos Verdes, very upper middle class enclave, and they would have meetings in this auditorium, and they'd have their flower arrangements out. And I just remember sitting, I think there were chairs out, and I was sitting in the back. I had been photographing the flower arrangements, and I just had this vision that the doors were going to close and lock, and I was never going to escape, because that was the milieu I was brought up in and was very familiar with, and it was not only the upper middle class rules, but it was the way that women of that era, you know, sort of like what was open to them to do, which wasn't a lot. And so this is what they did. And they would confide in me that it was sculpture, which was a whole other question about, like, you know, what's art and what isn't and why. And so all those, you know, things kind of get mixed up together. But yes, I mean, I think that the two judges were from different classes, which I know because I interviewed them both in their houses. Sort of the Jackie Kennedy table, you know, kind of every class aspires to the class of Jackie Kennedy, you know. So there's a lot about class. There was a lot about class in my upbringing.
Do you want to address the mother and art as shared, hybridized authority figure question?
You know, it isn't art that I'm criticizing. It's art talk that I'm criticizing. And it's, you know, there are some artists who are writers and a lot of artists who are really, you know, in their reading theory and thinking deep thoughts, but I'm not one of them. When I was first learning about art, I somehow we had access to Art Forum at my college, and so all the art students and art history students, which is what I was, would go read Art Forum like it was the Bible because it was going to explain everything to us. And I was a believer, you know, at the beginning. But now, you know, if Art Forum has an article about some artists that I've heard of and am interested in and want to know something about, you know, I'll open it up and then there'll be this incredible explanation, but it won't ever mention what the person is actually doing, you know, and then I throw it down. So I sort of, you know, went from true believer to, you know, not such a believer. On the other hand, I have been teaching at CalArts since 1977, and you can't teach art without talking and without having the students talk, you know, so I'm also an offender. But I try to keep it, the way I approach it is to try to keep it in English and also to just talk about, like, what were you trying to do, what makes this work, what makes this not work, and just keep it at that level, because that's kind of the level that I'm interested in.
Other questions? Do I? I always have more questions. How are we doing on time?
Yeah.
Ask you just about space in the films. And this curious way, I think this runs from the photographs to the films, of both being very at home in a space. We have a deep sense of how it's constructed, how it's organizing, how people inhabit it, and yet something's always not quite right. So I think of the Getty Center film and moving up to the wall and the steps that keep going. And it struck me watching the films that sound takes on the role of pushing us away from a sense of being comfortable in the space that you're showing us. So I wondered if you could talk a bit about both things, space and sound, not just the talk, that's certainly important, but also the way that the way you use, whether it's the rubber soles of feet, whether it's music, whether it's the Foley sound in I'll Remember Mama as they're closing the doors, all these small details that shift our sense of inhabitants, of inhabiting otherwise very well-defined spaces.
You know, I know this guy, and I know that he can talk about those things better than I can. So why don't you just go on? Give him back the mic. I'm not kidding. I think you kind of have said it. Well, so what I was thinking when you were talking about the stairs, again, nothing that I expected anybody to pick up on, and I decided not to put it in the script, but walking up the stairs, to the museum has got to be like this elevated space, and then not going in. I'm not going in there. I'm gonna tell you about this thing over here that we're not quite supposed to notice, but really it has a lot of meaning attached to it. So let's just go look at the wall, I don't know if that's what you mean by space or inhabiting it comfortably or uncomfortably. The Foley sounds, so I'm glad you picked up that was not live sound. I felt like, just wouldn't that be so cool if we put little sounds with these drawers opening and closing and the lids falling, but also that was really used to emphasize the kind of finality that you were supposed to feel at the end of the film, like, okay, the lid's coming down, it's not coming back up, bang, or plop, or whatever sound it was.
Just for the sake of those of you who haven't seen I'll Remember Mama, it's the footage is a found VHS tape of somebody demonstrating a dollhouse or
furniture, for very high-end dollhouse furniture for sale, actually, that they'd made these little rooms out of it.
It's exquisite,
Yeah.
little furniture, I have to say. I think one of the things to say about this question of space, which I think is a good one, is that with your turn to film and video making, there is more of a sense of inhabiting space. There is more of a idea about interiority and access to interiority than in most of the photographs.
The photographs were explicitly made to exclude space. All the objects in the photographs were, as much as I could possibly make them, up against the frontal plane, and that was because I really liked John, you know what I'm... No. I did like Walker Evans. No, it's a word. Abstraction. Abstraction. The more space you have, the less abstraction you have, visual abstraction. And once I don't know how to abstract in color. I don't think people really can do abstraction in color photography very well. And so once color is in the mix, goodbye to abstraction. And so I'm talking about in a realistic looking image. And so that was another thing I gave up. And it kind of almost happens automatically in color video or color film. And, I haven't looked at the black and white footage I shot to see if that looks more flat. That might be a project for you. You, Dan. So I'm not sure about that.
I think the way you document your mother in her own space is really fascinating and compelling and anxiety-inducing, I think, even for me. In the kind of framing her with this incredible distance, and then even just when she finally walks across the space and kind of passes in front of the camera, it becomes kind of signal event of the film. Can you talk about that a little bit in terms of, or maybe in terms of her participation in the creation of that document?
Well, she just did what I asked her, and she's my mother, So I asked her, and she said yes, and I kind of thought she would, and she didn't ask me what I was doing. I think she was afraid to find out, and well, no, I take it back. She did ask me, but at the time I didn't really know. So I would say, I don't know. I just feel like I should do this, which was the truth. And that was another kind of pile of stuff in the corner that then years later I picked up. But when she's walking through the house, what I had meant to do with that footage, and I think, given what some people have said to me, it actually does do that, but not in quite the way I meant it to. At the time, I felt like she was kind of, she had become more and more kind of frail, and I sort of thought of her as trapped up in this very high, luxurious, spacious condo. Although from later observation, I realized, no, she goes out a lot more than she tells me. So she wasn't really so trapped, but I thought she was. And so I wanted to have this footage, and she wasn't walking so well. She was using a walker by then. And so I thought she was so we showed up to film her, and she walks out with her cane. Where's the walker? And all dressed up and full makeup on, and did a really vigorous job of walking through the condo. So it was like, put that in the corner, it's not what I wanted. But then I found that I could use it for this film. And then shooting her from across the room, I think I knew that if I shot her close up that she would just hate it. Because she was I think 86 or 87 at the time. And she looked like she was 86 or 87. So I decided that I wanted to shoot her again. I didn't know why. And so I shot her from these great distances so that you couldn't really see her, but you could just see that she was there. But I think underneath that, somewhere, there was this mischief going on where this is something, tells you something about our relationship. I don't get any closer than about 30 feet away.
I can't imagine there'd be any mischief. There's time for one more question if somebody has.
Hi, so I'm an aspiring art history student. So as someone who's trying to engage in art talk and analysis, how does one remain self-critical but still function?
Okay, well, I know you too. So what I would say to you is when your professors tell you that high Renaissance art is better than, say, what came after high Renaissance?
I'm not an art historian.
Oh, come on, you know. No, not Baroque. In between high Renaissance. Mannerism. That mannerism's no good. You kind of have to learn it first. You sort of learn the official taste first, but you have to take it with a giant grain of salt, And the other thing about those kinds of judgments that you have to remember is they shift over time. And so what does that mean about what you're being told now? It's contingent upon when you're being told it. But you kind of have to learn it first, and then you can revise it as your own taste, as you become more confident in your own taste and your own knowledge. So that's what I've been wanting to say to you for a while.
Make mischief.
Yes, but you can't right away. You have to learn it first and then unlearn it.
So my question is, what did you learn moving from photography to film in terms of image there is a terrible reflexing, okay. In terms of making your images. We started from that. Let's conclude on that. What's new in you as an artist, taking those wonderful images of objects that you love so much.
You mean in the films or in the photos? Oh, well. Okay. Oh, what's the difference? Okay. Really, it was kind of, as I said, I was using a photographer's eye to the extent that I could in the videos and in the in the Super 8. But I had a lot of rigid rules about the photographs that I was able to give up in the videos because I didn't expect much of the images in the videos. I felt like the images were more kind of utilitarian, that they were there to interact with the narrative unfolding, and not have that kind of response that I was trying to elicit in the photograph. So I wouldn't quite say that I learned something about the images by changing. It was more that a whole different kind of thing opened up, which was narrative, and which I really loved doing, and I found out that I could do it, or some corner of narrative anyway.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you.